Hello and welcome to Leveraging Data for Peak Performance, a manufacturing webinar hosted by Dean Norton. Presenting today is Ed McGillis, Data and AI Consulting Manager, and Jim Tenza, Assurance Director and Manufacturing Industry Team Leader. We will be covering data analytics and manufacturing in today's webinar. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, hello and welcome to Leveraging Data for Peak Performance Manufacturing webinar hosted by Dean Norton. Presenting today is Ed McGillis, Data and AI Consulting Manager, and Jim Tenza, Assurance Director and Manufacturing Industry Team Leader. We will be covering data analytics and manufacturing in today's webinar. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please use the chat feature at the top right-hand corner of the screen. We will be monitoring it throughout the presentation and will make sure to share any technical questions with our presenters at the end. We do not address your question during today's presentation. Contact information is included at the end of the materials, so please reach out after as needed. This webinar is being recorded today and will be emailed to you by the end of this week. Thank you so much for joining us today. Do not hesitate to ask questions, and without further ado, I give you Jim Tenza.
Thanks, Julia. Before we get into our presentation, we wanted to provide a brief background on Dean Norton and our manufacturing expertise. Dean Norton is one of the largest accounting firms in the Southeast with multiple offices in Kentucky and North Carolina. At Dean Norton, we have formed industry teams to better serve our clients, and we do that for industries in which we have a great deal of expertise. We have 8 industries that we really focus in on, one of those being manufacturing. The teams meet on a regular basis, obtain specialized training, participate in national industry organizations, and develop thought leadership. Our manufacturing industry team includes professionals who work almost exclusively in the manufacturing sector. We have approximately 100 clients in the manufacturing industry. Many of these clients manufacture different types of products, such as machinery, equipment, tools, products for visually impaired individuals, chemicals, and many others. But we have a great deal of experience working with companies that manufacture certain products, such as food and beverage, especially bourbon and spirits, lumber and wood products, auto parts, and we also work with numerous distribution companies. So at Dean Norton, we provide many different types of services to manufacturers. The assurance services, which is primarily audits and reviews, as well as compilations and accounting and auditing, consulting, tax services, which is primarily preparation of tax returns. I do want to point out that we have tax professionals with a great deal of expertise in dealing with state and local taxes, and we provide various tax consulting services to manufacturers and their owners. Our technology group is the largest technology group within an accounting firm in the area. We have 30 to 40 technology experts, and we do a great deal of work around cybersecurity, server infrastructure design and support, cloud strategy, disaster recovery, video conferencing, and software consulting, and much, much more. We also have a team of professionals that work with internal audit departments in a co-sourcing or outsourcing arrangement. Our auditors perform risk assessment and test various controls and processes. And we also have a fraud and ethics hotline that we provide to various manufacturing companies. We also perform business valuations of manufacturing companies, and we perform various accounting functions and procedures for manufacturers. And of course, we have data analytics and collaboration experts who will be presenting today. So lastly, I just wanted to touch on a few trends we're seeing in the industry. Obviously, I can probably speak for a whole hour on a lot of these things, but just scratching the surface here, the manufacturing sector has remained strong, at least through the end of December. There has been a good recovery over the past year or so from the downturn caused by the 2018-2020 trade war and the public health crisis that we've been in. With that said, there's a fair amount of uncertainty around supply chains and rising costs. Most manufacturers have backlogs of orders, and are waiting on the delivery of certain raw materials or parts. And there have been significant price increases across all parts of the supply chain. And there's also uncertainty about how the Russia-Ukraine conflict will impact things globally. There are many companies worried about operations overseas. Currently, we see many manufacturers addressing how their company will deal with various ESG matters, that's environmental, social, and governance matters. And manufacturers, just like most other industries, are struggling to hire and retain their workforce. Most manufacturers that we talk to believe that they are understaffed, and many of them are struggling to find ways to be more flexible with their workforce. Over the past year, we've seen many manufacturers beginning to deal with the new accounting standard related to leases, as many manufacturers have a large amount of operating leases. Also, over the past couple of years, we've seen manufacturers be hit harder by cybersecurity issues, mainly because they're more decentralized, having multiple locations, including foreign locations. Lastly, the ability to use data-driven insights is redefining manufacturers' value proposition. Companies are building industrial Internet of Things-based technology platforms to provide digital solutions that increase productivity across the manufacturing enterprise. And some companies are building connected products that yield insights into their customers' operations. So that's just my quick overview, and I will now turn it over to Ed.
Thanks, Jim. As Julia said in the beginning, my name is Ed McGillis. I head up the data and AI group at Dean Norton. We're going to jump in here with just a definition of what is business analytics. So business analytics, obviously, we could talk about this at a high level. We're going to be talking about it in the realm and the scope of manufacturing data today. But it's another one of those buzz terms that's going to get thrown around. You're going to find as many definitions for it as you look for. It can be comprised of many components. But the way we always like to discuss it is simply this. So business analytics is using data to answer questions. Now, as you've heard this term maybe from other people, other sources, where I have the ellipses here, that's often filled in by a bunch of buzzwords and industry jargon. So you may hear it's using, business analytics is using models, statistical analysis, artificial intelligence with your data to create insights, make decisions, predictions. We can expand this as far as we want, but the core idea just comes down to this simple sentence. It's using data to answer questions. What those questions are can vary. The complexity of the answers to those questions can vary. But it's important to keep that framework in mind as we go forward. So what does that journey look like when you start getting into analytics? When you know, you're usually at a point where you know you have the data. In many organizations' cases, you have more data than you know what to do with. That's a common refrain that happens. We're producing data at an exponential rate still, and we're not consuming it at that same rate. So we're always going to have this plethora of data that sits here unanalyzed, waiting to be looked through for insights, waiting to be formatted into a skeleton, a model, a template of something that could solve a business problem for us. So that's a little bit about what we'll walk through here. We really like this graph that shows the different ways an organization grows through their data analytics maturity. So the one that everybody can pretty much agree on and that everybody is comfortable with is the first one on the arrow there, which we call descriptive analytics. So descriptive analytics, almost every organization has this. This is looking at your data in the past. So what happened in the past? What happened this quarter? What were the production numbers? What did I hit my targets that were set? You know, it's something that's usually brass tacks for getting into business analytics. Most organizations will have this. The next level, diagnostics, we're moving a little bit towards why did this happen? We have our historical information. Now we're going to start digging in and looking a little bit about why did it happen? If I missed my targets, did I have unplanned equipment downtime? What were the contributing factors to the numbers that I have already found in my descriptive process? From there, it's a fairly big jump to our next two categories. So the next one would be predictive analytics. This is scratching the surface of using that artificial intelligence and machine learning to try to predict what's going to happen based on what we know in the prior two phases. So based on both historical data and based on the reasons that we found that caused that historical data to vary based on our target levels. So that's taking quite a few things together and trying to predict what's going to happen. That can be a simple regression type prediction where we just take the past and we model that out based on this number of inputs. This is what the result will be. Or it could be an entire model that pulls in multiple features to create what that end state is going to look like. And the last one is definitely complex, prescriptive. This doesn't just look at and predict what the future is going to be. This tells you what you need to do to impact the future. So what changes do you need to make in the various business units, maybe equipment, maybe personnel, staffing? What do you have to do in order to hit certain predictions that were made and to hit goals? So the way to think about this curve is these all build on each other. You can't get to one level without the other. They are in a line for a reason. They're connected. But the other thing to remember is there's no need to go into analytics and say, in 6 months, we're going to build a prescriptive data model that's going to determine all of our staffing needs, all of our equipment needs, all of our CapEx needs, and have that all laid out in advance. It's not going to happen that way. There are small steps on the way here to build this up, to get the data in the right format, to get the culture in your organization to be more data focused. Many hurdles you'll hit along the way here, and we'll get into a couple of those later. But just wanted to lay this out to begin with, kind of what we're looking at with this process. Next, we're actually going to go in and see a little bit of a tool that we use. And we'll get to that tool shortly here, but let me switch the screen. And I'm going to point to my desktop. Hopefully everybody will be able to see this clearly. What we're looking at is a data spreadsheet for a manufacturing organization, of course, called Contoso. The grain, what we would call the specificity of this data is going to be data at a production line level per shift. So you can see our line levels here, PBI 01, 001, and 002. And then we're working 3 shifts across both of those lines, which we have here. And then you can scan some of the data here and see what we have in here. We have obviously shift length, how long breaks, anticipated shutdown time essentially. And then we have actuals here. So actual runtime, actual downtime. How many of our products did we produce? What was the target amount of pieces? Then we have some reject counts, good counts that we're going to get our quality information on here. And cycle time and line ID there. So pretty simple spreadsheet, a little more simplified than probably what's going to come out of any of the production level manufacturing systems. Those will spit out many more rows than this. You won't just get one clean line per shift, but this does sum up nicely what it would look like if you had a system like this, or if you compile this data together and we wanted to look at both what is our production line performance, what's our shift performance, what's our output. You'll notice we're not getting down to the equipment level here. So the grain, what we call the grain of reporting, is higher than that. The lowest we're going to get is the production line by shift. So if we wanted to get lower, we'd have to include equipment specific items, which lines of equipment we're on, and then individual times for each of those. So keep that in mind. A lot of people do like to get to that, especially when you're looking at things like predicted downtime, predicted maintenance. For that, you'd have to have equipment level. We're abstracting this up for this webinar, just one level higher than that. All right, that said, we have pulled this into a tool called Power BI. And we use Power BI often in Dean Norton. It's a great tool to explore, manipulate, visualize data, gain insights. We'll look a little bit at some of the new AI technology they've put in here with a couple of examples as well. But for now, just realize that the only thing we've fed into this system is the spreadsheet we just showed. And we're arranging this in what we call a star schema format. So all that means is that we have our production, what we call a fact table in the middle. So this is the exact data you were looking at, runtime, reject count, and we did some calculations here for things we're going to do in the dashboard. But this is our main, and then we broke out anything that relates to that fact. For example, what product are we running? What line did it run on? What shift was it run on? This is our friendly date table here that helps us look at things on a month basis. And then if there were any alarms, we broke these out separately also. So we took one file and we modeled that with Power BI. One of the reasons we do use Power BI, and one of the good things for anybody on this call, is that you can do the same thing that we just did to create this. So Power BI Desktop itself, which is the tool you see here, is free to use. You can go to Microsoft and download this today. If you'd like to get started with this, please let us know after the webinar. We can send you these sample files in the Excel sheet as well, so you can get used to the tool and take home what we're doing here today. But it's a great tool, and we'll be using that to show what we can do with this data now that we have it modeled. We're going to start with a partially built dashboard here. What we're going to fill in is some of the missing pieces here, and then you can see we have multiple pages to the dashboard down at the bottom. We'll go through those too. So we have our summary page here, and we have our overall equipment effectiveness page here. We're going to fill in one of these as we go. And then we have different breakouts for production data, finished goods by day of the month, operating time, and then we have some supporting tables here after insights. We will hit the details one. But again, there's a lot of stuff here to think through. We won't have time to go through nearly all of this. But again, if you would like this, we can share this with you after the webinar. Right, so let's get to filling in some of the blanks we have here. Some of the targets we're hitting here: availability percentage, performance percentage, quality percentage. Let's look at availability being one of our key factors here, and we're going to set this up in its own chart. So we're going to set up an area chart for this. We're going to fit it in here. All right, and so for my area chart, I'm going to look at this by month. So to do that, I'm opening up my date table here, and you can see I'm dragging month to the axis to tell it I want that axis looking at a per month basis for my quality data. That's how I want to monitor it. And then in my fact table, close that, my fact production table I talked about. There's a calculation in here for availability percent already when we talked about bringing those in, and I will just bring that over. And we put that into values. So pretty quickly, I'll shrink these so it gets a little bigger. We'll have to open and shrink these as we go. Pretty easily, I have my availability per month. The data in here is through May 2001. If we want to see what that looked like on a year basis, I can go back to year 2020 and look at that January to December. I could also get more advanced and do things with prior year. The availability to do things here really isn't limited. All right, let's go to our next. Let's fill in the next here. What we're going to throw in here, based on our data, we want to see what our finished goods versus first pass yield look like. So with what we completed, what percent of that, what does that look like with what we got through the first time versus what had to go through a quality control process? So this one's a little more complex because we want to show two things at once. So for this, we're going to use something called a line and stacked column chart, which is represented right here. I'll have a little more data on this one. Make sure we got it nice and big here. And then we'll blow it up again at the end just to make sure everybody can see it. So similar here, we're also going to look at this on a month basis. So our date table, again, lets us provide that. Our shared access is going to be month. And then we get to choose what our column values are going to be and what our line values are going to be. So for our columns, we're going to pick what the good count was. So which of these passed, which of these got through. For the line, we're going to look at the quality percentage. So what percent of those passed inspection and didn't have to be redone here. So we'll go to our fact production, and then we have a good count here. Good count goes in our column values. And our line values, we're going to use that same quality metric that was under availability that we saw before, or we can just get a quality percent. Now off the bat, it's graphing that line low, and why it's doing that, you can't quite see this probably, but we only have one y-axis here, and this axis is much higher than a percentage, so it's grounding our second line here. What we do to go in and fix that is we go to visual here, and there it is, secondary y-axis. We turn the secondary y-axis on. Then we do not want to align the 0 between the two because they're very different. And so with a couple clicks, now we have 2 looks here. We can see our quality was really high in April here, although we still fell a little short production-wise, so that might be something to look at. Other months where it's low, and our pass percentage is 92%. There's not a whole lot of variance here, but still might be able to get some insights for this. All right, so let's look at by line. Maybe looking at this data by production line might give us a little bit more information as well. So let's go ahead and do that now. I got to open my flyout windows here again. We're just going to do a simple stack bar on this one. And we'll slide that in down here. Try not to turn on any other visuals while I do this. It's always the trick with Power BI. We'll just shrink that one to make it easier. There we go. All right, this one will actually be set up where we can drill through and drill down to see a little bit of the data here. This is important, especially in an overview page, that we're able to do this, because a lot of times on overview, we won't have all the detail, but we have these backing tables like this detail data that can give us more information about something. So we're going to show what that looks like a little bit here, but for the actual visual, what we're going to want to look at is we're going to want to look at the 2 production lines and what the reject count is by those 2 lines, and have that initially split out by shift. So to do that, this one's just a little more complex, but we'll just run through it really quick. The axis, since we also want to be able to look at, when we dig down, we're going to look at what product we have. We're going to have 2 things here on our axis. So the first one of these is we want shift. And then we can add one below it that pulls our product name. And for that is under dimension product, and it's actually called article code. Get that in there. We want to look at it by line. So how we do that is this small multiples field here. We'll put that in while we're thinking about it. Production line. And we'll just do the line. We want to reference it by something we know, not just by an ID. And then the values we actually want to pull out. We want to pull out reject count. So for this, we're going back to our production fact table that we talked about. And we have this in measures, reject count. So that'll quickly spin up. We have to do some quick editing to this, since this is giving us a grid of 4, and we really only want to look at 2 at a time. So let me change that real quick. Small multiple grid, we want 1 row. There we go. All right, so close these so we can see it a little better. Now we're looking at our reject count by shift and line. So production line 1, I'm getting a count here, production line 2. We can also show the next level of this, which again, since we had it by product, now we can see by product 1, by product 2, by product 3, what are my reject counts on each of the line. Production line 2 does not run product 2, so we have a blank there. But it allows us to drill through here. If I want to look at something specific, so I want to get more data about this, this is where the drill through would take me to the details page. So if you're setting up a dashboard, you're going to follow this format in general. On your overview, you're going to have your key manufacturing KPIs, whether it's by a product, whether it's by a piece of equipment, whether it's by a production line. And then you're going to want to have breakoffs to be able to drill through those analytics to look at the real data here. So if I'm getting my 2021 year to date, based on what I just looked at for this product, for this shift, if I need to analyze that, I can go here and I can go to export data once I'm there. So the idea is to have that backing page that gives you a lot more information. I can see my actual cost of rejected items across my shifts here for product 3. So that kind of information is more appropriate to break down here at the detail level. All right, so for that, I think we got our overview page pretty well done here. Let's add one more on our OEE here, overall equipment effectiveness. We got a blank here. Let's track total production by line here. So for this, we're going to use a stack bar chart. I'm going to hit my flyouts here. It'll shrink the screen a little bit. So that should work. And then we'll have completed the dashboard view of what we're looking at here. Okay, since we're by line, you're probably familiar with this axis by now. This really drives off, what we're looking for. But since we're pulling this from the production data, we're not going to go to the line table on this. We're pulling from this fact table. And we will look for line ID will work. All right, and for the values, we're going to look at both reject count and good count on this. So we want to see them both kind of in that stack bar chart view. Let's go good count there. I think I got a reject count here. Yep. And so pretty quickly there, we get a quick view of comparison of those two production lines. We're going to change that since we can't see it. We're going to go in here to the data labels and values. And let's change that font to white just so it sticks out. So now when I drop these out, that's going to look a lot better if you can see that there. So for production line 2, I'm getting 94% versus 92% good here. And then rejects here, whether these are scrap or rework, we don't break it down at that level, but again, it's there. And we've built, a pretty compelling just from that one. If we go back to thinking about what was in this spreadsheet here, we have a lot of rows, but we really don't have a big width of data here. This isn't a wide data set. Normally, you're going to see this much larger, even approaching 100 columns for most systems that are going to be spitting this data out. Here we have a nice and easy, maybe 15 to 20 columns, but we're still able to break that out into the objects. So our production lines, our products, our actual facts, manufacturing facts, and then be able to come up with insights from that data. All right, so the one thing I did want to show, which is on a little bit in the AI realm. So one of the things Microsoft does, they're doing it with Power BI and they're doing it with other tools as well. They're starting to bring what they call it's really used to be called Edge AI, but it's the idea that you can start doing some of the AI and machine learning on your own PC, on your own server. You don't have to go set up your own models, which you would traditionally have to do if you got into this space. And one of the areas where I think this is really interesting for users using this data, especially if you're creating this or have somebody to create this, but other users are going to have to live and work with this data, is the idea of the automated Q&A. And so what this is, it allows us to drop a dialogue just onto a page of the report. And you can see it's already come up with some examples based on the data. Now, you can program this with synonyms, which we've done in a few demos. You can see add synonyms now. We haven't done that. So this is a view at kind of the rawest level without a lot of help and how we can still get data out of this. So it's giving me some suggestions right off the bat. And maybe I'm interested in this prior year availability percent and availability percent by week number as a line chart. So since we don't have all the data for 2021 in here yet, let's see if we can change that. Just say for 2020, yeah. So we can graph that pretty easily for 2020. A couple other things we could just type in here if we're thinking. We happen to know the data model a little bit. So from what you guys have seen, you know that quality percent is one of the things we've already used. So we're going to start with that, and it didn't let me start with that. Quality percent, do that. That gives me the overall quality percent. But if I want to say I want quality percent by month as area chart, I'm going to get a graph of the basically my quality KPI. We saw a little bit of this on the overview page when we just did a look at 2021. So this is a full look. This is pulling 2020 data since it's looking at the full year here. But instead of going through that process where you'd have to explain to a user how to drag and drop and put things into the value field, put things into the access field, a lot of times you might just be able to turn them loose with something like this and have them write their own queries. The synonyms help for them not having to know that, hey, if you want to see scrap percentage, you got to do reject percent. So you could add different names for things where that works, and that's the grail we try to get to when we're trying to enable this as a type of self-service AI in reporting. So the easier you make that process, the better. A little more complex. Oh, my product name is in the product table, and it's called article description. I can get that up here. Again, it gives me a stack bar, non-stack bar chart here, which isn't all that helpful. So let's look at this a few different ways. We can say by month. Again, that just kind of overloads us. Doesn't really provide a whole lot of information. But then we can call out what visual we want. So for something like this, I really like the ribbon chart. And then we're at a much better look here from June of last year to March. And we can see that product 2 went from on the low end of our quality percentage to the high. It's back down to low for October, but we can see how these things change a little bit when different products are running through the lines. We can see that only product 1 was running in September, August, July. So it might give us a little more than we were looking for and provide some value there. So again, this is one of the new features that Power BI has rolled into the desktop tool for free. You don't have to have special processors or graphics cards or anything to run the AI and machine learning in the desktop tool. Some of the more complex stuff runs in what we call the Power BI service, which does run in the Azure cloud, but everything we're showing you right here runs in the desktop tool. What it's doing is it's using what we call NLP, natural language processing, to figure out what intents and keys that you're typing in here, and then it goes and figures those out with the data in the backend. That's where synonyms help out a little bit. You can get a little more powerful and wide in what language it can accept to complete a task. But for us, just being able to show this with the data set, that single spreadsheet that we just pulled in, shows the power of that solution pretty well. All right, so you can see we touched about 10% of that deck, used about 25 minutes to do so. It's obviously too complex to build that out from scratch or show everything in there at once. But I would say if you're interested in this, if you want to copy this to experiment on your own, explore some of that data, even try to feed in some of your data into that. Some of these tables you might have noticed they had a little star, a diamond next to them. That's just so that you can take those tables and customize that to your organization if you wanted to show this to somebody, a decision maker or somebody you want on a team to help build this out. So if that's been of use to you, we can certainly provide this. Please just reach out to any of us. With that, I'm going to go back to the deck. Give me one moment. Going to resume with where we left off. Hopefully that was useful. Always like to put a demonstration and walk through a little bit of what we're talking about. Sometimes it helps people think of problems or ideas that can help them going forward. So now that you've seen that, and maybe everybody has in their head a little bit a data set that they're thinking of, how do you get started? And so I've called this the 5 W's. And on the first W, I cheat a little bit. So you're going to have to let me off the hook for that. But I call this one why. So why do we want to go through this process? Why do we want to get into data analytics? And it comes down to a what question. So what are we trying to solve? Do we need an answer to a question? Is it for managers, executives, the board? Are we trying to solve a problem with equipment? Are we trying to predict outages? Are we trying to predict maintenance? Are we trying to predict how to schedule shifts or what the staffing should be on shifts based on orders open, based on work in progress? What are the triggers that are causing us to need to solve a problem? That goes a long way. It's a little bit of a myth that you can go out and create an all-encompassing data warehouse and then point that data warehouse to somebody on a data team and have them use it to solve your problems. Ideally, we're creating data and relationships to solve a specific problem, to answer a specific question. That becomes very true when we get into AI and machine learning. Most of those models, when you customize things in that realm, you're solving a very specific question, and it's not necessarily repeatable for other questions. When we talk about data warehousing, we can be a little more flexible for that, but there's still limits. So it's very important to start with the why. Why are we going down this path? Why are we looking at business analytics now? What question, what problem are we going after? So I'm not counting that as what, because I think that's a why, even though it has a what in it. Who's going to be involved in the process is often just as important. Most projects where we're solving business problems like this or answering questions are not led by IT. They sit outside the realm of IT. They're being driven by business leaders in the organization that have a real need to solve this problem or answer this question, which we just talked about. Sometimes it'll be multiple leaders over multiple groups that have to be involved. So it's important to get the who also. We'll need stakeholders along the way when you're building out a system like this, when you're trying to solve a problem. That'll be a key part of the solution as you push forward. So this is what I called the what. So once we know who needs to be involved, once we know the why, what problem we're trying to solve, we usually get down to, okay, what's the data that we need and where does it live? And so this map I always find entertaining because it's fairly true in an organization to go through this and try to find out where the data lives that you need to access. Do you need staffing information out of an HRMS? Do you need production or dollar information out of an ERP? Is there some old mainframe code that's running some of our equipment that we need to go through and pull out, look through JCL code or look through the resulting data that gets printed out? So what data do we need? How do we find it? All important questions here. And it comes from the prior 2 slides. So the people that we now know are the who. They have to help us through this process. The why convinces the people to help us through this process. So everything's additive in this. The when is a little bit, not a little bit, probably the most abstract piece of this. This is, depending on your organization, if you're not a data-centric organization already, the culture change that's required to enable access to data and fast updates of data and pivoting to that data-driven decision-making is a large change. It's important not to underestimate that change, especially if your WHO has identified, some top-level executives that are going to have to get on board. That support's going to be critical. The people involved are going to need to understand what it means to be data-centric. How are you going to rely on the data going forward? Are you going to eliminate multiple sources of truth to go with one source of truth? All those discussions take a while. The win isn't necessarily the building of the solution. The win is when the organization is ready to support pivoting to that data-centric view. And again, everything before this comes into that. So the stakeholders you have on board, the problem you're trying to solve, where do you know the data is at? A lot of that plays into how fast your organization is going to move towards a solution. And then the where, this is really, this gets into a little more bit of technical knowledge here. The only one of these that actually does, but once we know the systems, where in those systems, where in those data sets, where in those applications, does the data that we need to solve our problem for our stakeholders live? Is it at that above ground level? Most of the time not. That above ground level is going to be some kind of presentation layer that somebody's looking at for the data. We're going to have to traverse that root structure there and figure out, where does this live? How deep do we have to go? How do we tie these roots together? Are some of them already tied together because the business applications have been connected via either a key or some other system? And as we traverse this, we figure that out. So this is really our first foray into building once we hit this point. Hopefully that made sense. Sometimes it helps to go back to this as kind of a last thought. As you traverse this arrow, and you already have that descriptive analytics in place. So reports are being produced for somebody's looking at key numbers that are coming out, somebody's looking at metrics. So there's probably questions and problems that need to be solved based on that right now. So based on that, how do we look at solving those? A lot of the time, a dashboard like I showed you is a great way to go into diagnostics. We can see there pretty quickly, are we having high defect rates versus shift versus production line? Where are my problems there that I can start digging into? You can see how that level is not as big of a jump as our predictive levels that we talked about. But again, getting the 5 W's solved and figuring out how to move from that descriptive to diagnostic is a great first step in a bite-sized chunk that most organizations can get started with. And we're certainly there to help as well. So I've left about 15 minutes here. Yep, 15 minutes for Q&A and discussion, if we have any.
Ed,
Nothing at this time, Ed, but I would love to hear from maybe Judy. See if she has anything she wants to say. Great.
Yeah, I think one of the questions that we get often is this can just seem completely overwhelming to somebody. Like there's no possible way that we could do all of these things that you're showing. And what advice do you have for somebody, and maybe Jim, even also for the two of you, as you look at this, if somebody's trying to think of how do they get started on this, how do they really start to think differently, what's the very first thing that you would recommend that they do?
So I always would recommend this one. So the why, going back to, is there a problem or a difficult situation in the organization that needs to be solved, or a question that cannot easily be answered based on the data you're receiving today? This can be big, but we can often pare this down into an actionable item. So, the problem can't be we need to increase our profitability by 300%. To start small, it's going to have to be smaller than that. So if you're producing, if you're manufacturing, Do we look at, increasing the yield of a specific piece of equipment? Do we look at reducing defect percents or diagnostic reporting of figuring out why this piece of equipment or this production line has a higher defect rate than another production line? So boil it down into a small piece of what's the problem trying to be solved or what questions trying to be able to move a lot quicker in solving that. And it becomes really an actionable proof of concept. So we build it out, but at the time we're building a small piece out like that, we are interacting with multiple systems. And then usually the next problem to solve or the next question to answer becomes apparent during that process.
Thanks.
We can wait a few more minutes, but I do just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to our speakers, Ed and Jim, and especially Judy for chiming in at the end, giving us a little bit more context to all the fabulous stuff that was discussed during this webinar. The recording and all the slides will be sent to everyone who attended today. Please be on the lookout for more exciting data analytics webinars and more manufacturing thought leadership pieces. We're always trying to give you guys the best information whenever we can. But thank you again for stopping by today, and I will leave it with Ed and Jim if they have any final remarks.
I'd just like to thank everybody for coming. And if anything here caught your eye, again, we can share the sample data sets and dashboard we used. Just please reach out.
Yes, thanks everyone.